Well, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, and thanks for understanding. The smoking ceremony took a little bit longer because we're privileged to have so many people in the room this year with 500 registrations, and appreciate we had to change the layout a little bit from last year, but it's fantastic to be back in Adelaide for another year. So thank you for agreeing to host us. For those that don't know me, I am Iain MacKenzie. I'm chair of the board of NHRA. And I acknowledge my other directors that are here with me today, Kate Vino, Ollie Costello, Doug Smith, Greg Ayres and Sandy White. And especially thank Cliffy outside for again agreeing to conduct that smoking ceremony for us. This year, the forum is focused beyond transactional relationships and initiatives and on transitions and integrated solutions, on transformation to be ahead of ready and to use research to act big and bold. To kick us off, it's my very great honour to be able to invite the Honourable Emily Bourke, Minister for Emergency Services, Correctional Services, Minister for Autism, Minister for Recreation, Sport and Racing, what a huge portfolio minister, to the stage and officially open our Natural Hazards Research Forum for 2025 in South Australia. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and I would also like to start with a very big Namani Mani Napudni Nainari Emily Bourke Ghana Mina Nanajul Ghana Yata Tempaninthi, acknowledging we're meeting on Ghana land in Ghana language, and thank Cliffy for your beautiful welcome outside. I did get out of the car and smelled smoke, and usually I would panic, but it's great warm welcome that you've provided today, and thank you for everything you do in our state. Bringing conferences together is never easy, so I'd just really like to thank everyone that was involved, and particularly Professor Iain MacKenzie and Brendan Moon as well, and Andrew Gissing from Natural Hazards Research Australia. It is an incredible effort to bring so many people together, not just from one state, but across the nation, to be having these significant discussions, because the banner behind me, I feel that in the last 12 months, we have unfortunately seen a number of these happen in our state. Hopefully, in our country, hopefully we don't see the tsunami particularly. But I just want to say thank you for each and every one of you coming together and giving your time for each of us to learn. I'm relatively new to this role. I think it's my fifth month that I've been involved, and I've got Chris over here and Christy from the SES in South Australia nodding their head, and it has been an incredible journey to be on with our emergency services in South Australia with the MFS, the CFS and the SES. The learnings I've taken from you have been incredible, and I want to say a very special thank you to each and every one of you, because without the knowledge that you have provided to me, knowing where we go next as a government would be very difficult. And I say that because I had the great privilege of learning the history of emergency services in South Australia just recently when we spent some time together. I learned about the challenges and the opportunities that come, because when we sit down and give each other time to learn is where we know where we can go next and where we can be bold, as we've learnt today from this conference. And those sort of changes and challenges that come about, I guess, come from taking risks. So I heard from SAFECOM and the CFS and the SES and the MFS that in the last decade, there was a decision to move our emergency services together under one roof. This was a big challenge, but also came an opportunity for us to have a more united and professional opportunity to tackle the challenges in front of us. So it was a big challenge to become under one headquarters, to be in one building, but it was achieved because so many were willing to work together to achieve that outcome. But also outside the walls of that building are many difficulties that face our community as well. Just as that building represents the opportunity for change, so too does the opportunities that are outside of that building. Our communities are evolving rapidly, and just 10 years ago, spotting an electric car was rare. 5 years ago, my kids would play Spot the Tesla. We cannot play that game anymore because it would get very annoying. These vehicles are becoming part of everyday life. With them come home batteries, charging infrastructure, and new considerations for fire safety and emergency response. At the same time, our homes are transforming, where solar panels are becoming more common than they're not, and the materials inside our homes have shifted from solid wood to a wide variety of synthetic and prefabricated options. Nearly everything we use requires a charger or a battery of some kind. These changes in our built environment bring new opportunities, but also new hazards, as I'm sure everyone in this room is very much aware. But these hazards we need to understand. Modern homes burn faster, and perhaps some of the hazards from these manufactured materials are yet to be fully understood. What might seem like convenience and progress in design can sometimes come with hidden risks for flood and fire scenarios. As materials and layouts and energy systems evolve, our knowledge and readiness must also evolve. Our natural environment is shifting, and so too does our knowledge and experiences in regards to the outdoor environment. Our summers are hotter and drier. In South Australia, we had the hottest summer on record. It is dry, as many of you would have seen when coming into our state, and those that live here know how very dry it has been. We have seen around the country, as we said earlier, we have seen floods, cyclones, and devastating bushfires. And right now, in the heart of our desert in South Australia, you wouldn't know it, but there is an incredible flood happening, the largest on record. It is half the size of Tasmania. And those floods have come from waters from the ex-cyclone Alfred in Queensland. The scale of this flood is incredible, and it's a really good reminder about the challenges we have faced with not only our built environment, but our natural environment in our country. In just the past 6 months, South Australia has deployed over 200 volunteers and emergency service personnel to help with these natural disasters. Our people never hesitate. They are willing to give their time, and that's why we're willing to invest in the very people that give so much to our country. All of this change, involves challenges, but they also enable us as a government to learn. They present incredible opportunities to be proactive, to be able to lead, and to be bold. Our greatest assets, as I said before, are our people, our volunteers, our personnel, our staff that put on the yellow, the navy, the orange uniforms to help our state. But as a government, our job is to make sure they have the right tools to face these challenges ahead. We often think about emergencies and we often think about lights and sirens, but there is so much more, and that is what I've learned over the last few months. The tools now need to include mapping and analytics, communications that enable us to know where the disasters may be or where they may come from and what they might do when we are in our disasters. We need those tools in planning and design codes. And that's why as a government we have invested in some of these areas just the last budget last week, something we're very proud of to be able to do to support our emergency services. By helping as a government, we can help calculate these risks. We can help understand the opportunities, but we also need to see where these challenges might take us. Creating a centralised emergency agency some years ago in South Australia may have seemed like a risk, it may have seemed like a bold move to make, but it's enabled us to have a more united front, to have an understanding in how to tackle these challenges and these hazards. And just like that challenge, we have new challenges ahead of us that will hopefully also provide opportunities. And it is so good to see so many people here today to do just that, to share their knowledge, to share your understandings. So as a government, we don't have to guess. We have the knowledge provided to us by the very people in this room. So thank you for giving your time to be here in South Australia, to come back to South Australia again for this conference. And I thank each and every one of you for the knowledge you will share.
Minister, thank you for that. I understand it's a Parliament day and you have to leave immediately, so thank you again. And my apologies, Cliff, we had to do that in that order to enable the Minister to get back to Parliament, but it's my very great honour to welcome Cliffy Wilson to the stage from Kaaru for an official welcome to country. Thank you.
Well, just want to start by saying it's an absolute honour for me to have the opportunity today to represent the Kaurna community down here, the traditional custodians in the City of Adelaide, but also to represent my family and also Kuma Kaaru Cultural Services, which is an organisation that I work for. And I'm very fortunate to be able to showcase my language and culture throughout the Adelaide CBD, surrounding suburbs, covering Kaurna country. And Kuma Kaaru's gave me the platform to be a part of the first generation of my family, to be able to connect back with culture and to relearn language. So in saying that, I'd now like to welcome you in the traditional Kaurna language. And I want to start by saying, Mani Nina Budni, Nyankana Mirna, Nā Mani. Nā Nāri Cliffy Tunku Munacha Wilson. Nā Ghana, Naranjiri, Naranga, Nadri, Arandamayu. Marivichanga Ghana Mirna, Nadlu Tambandi, Nadlu Ghani Yatanga Tikandi. Nā Wangandi Mani Budni Ghani Yatana, Naju Yukandali Yakandalia, Nachalia. So to translate that, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to see you all. It's good to see that you're doing well. Like I said outside, my name is Cliffy Wilson. However, down here in Kaurna country, my traditional names are Tunku and Manacha. So I always like to take the opportunity to give a bit of an explanation behind these names so you get a bit of an understanding of what they are and what they mean to me. The first one, Tunku, is my individual totem. And our totems in communities across the country, they can range from native plants and trees we have in this country, native animals, or even some of the tools and artefacts that we've created over time. And our role is to then become the protector of whatever that may be. So I was given an animal, so just a few rules that I have to go by. I can't hunt, kill, or eat that animal. And if I see it sick or injured, I have to nurture it back to health. Now, I always say when having a discussion with my elders many, many years ago, to get my individual totem, we forgot to have a little discussion around my safety that night because they thought it was a good idea to give me Tunku, which is actually the king brown snake, one of the most dangerous animals in the world. So I think they kind of threw me under the bus with that one, so thank you for that, I appreciate it. But no, I just like to have a little bit of fun with that one. However, Manacha is my birth order name, so when a mother down here in Kaurna country has given birth to children, all those children are given a birth order name. And Manacha, for me, it translates to the fourth born and male of my family. My family are proud Kaurna people from here in the Adelaide Plains, which was the country that I was born and raised on and still call home today. However, we are also proud Ngarrindjeri people from back on the lower lakes of the Coorong on the Fleur Peninsula. My family ties also extend out to the Naranga people back on the York Peninsula, the Nudgee people out to the mid-north of South Australia, and last but not least, we have very strong family connection also to the Aranda people, which is in the Northern Territory, just in Alice Springs. And I'd like to say welcome to today's Bambambalya, which translates to conference or event, depending on how you want to use that word. But also just like to acknowledge this part of the country that we're standing on. It was a very significant area for the Kaurna people, which we refer to as Tarandanyanga. So I'd like to give you some background on this word as well, because it is made up of two words in the Kaurna language, and it was a way for the Kaurna people to pay respects to two things that were very significant in their culture. So the first half of that word is Taranda. Can we say Taranda? Beautiful. So Taranda is the big red kangaroo, and it's the totem down here for the Kaurna people. And we believe that Taranda had given men and women their law down here in Kaurna country that we abide by for many years and still do today. But the second half of that word, however, is Ganya. Can we say that one? Lovely. Now, Ganya's a rock or a stone. And we had a very large rock located just near the convention centre, right next to the River Torrens, or as we call it, Katawarapari, which translates to Red Gun River. And that rock was significant for the Kaurna people because we would go around towards that rock and we would perform ceremonies there. And communities from all across the country would come to join us for ceremonies around that rock. Unfortunately, you won't see it anymore. It was quarried down many years ago to help build some of the foundations for the older churches and the buildings that are still standing throughout the Adelaide CBD today. But when we combine those two words, it becomes Tarandanyanga, which translates to Big Red Kangaroo Rock, or we'd also refer to it as the dreaming place of the Big Red Kangaroo. So maybe also pay respects to the cultural and spiritual beliefs of the Kaurna people and recognise that the continuous connection to the land, the sky, and the waterways that surround and connect us are still as strong, still as important, and also still as resourceful to the living Kaurna people today. I'd also like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and give a special thank you to those who paved the way for me to be able to stand here today to showcase a cleansing ceremony. I'll talk a little bit more about that after I finish the welcome. but also to represent my community. I really appreciate the pathway they've given me and the platform they've been able to provide for me here with all the hard work they've done in previous years to get me to this point in my life today. But also, I'd like to recognise the many different religions, traditions and faiths we have across the country today. Pay respects to other Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander First Nations people across the country, those in attendance with us here today. But before I get out of here, like I said, I just want to talk a little bit more about the cleansing ceremony and some of the reasons we do that. Firstly, it's a way to mark new beginnings in life. So traditionally, if we had a birth or a wedding, we'd have a cleansing ceremony there. These days, if a government organisation has moved to a new office and they've got a new building site, we'd be fortunate enough to be asked to go out there to cleanse that area. And the reason we'd cleanse off the area, because if a country is disturbed, we feel like there might be some bad spirits or negative energies that might be around there. So the smoking ceremony is a way to help get rid of that bad energy or that bad spirit that may be hanging around. But it was also a way to welcome guests onto country as well, because each and every one of us in this room have an individual scent about us. So what we do with the smoke is we cover that scent with the scent of country, and then our ancestors who have gone on to the spiritual world can come down, recognise that scent and keep us protected while we're here on country. So we've got guests from all over the country here. You've gone through the right protocols, so hopefully our ancestors keep you safe here on the beautiful Kaurna country. So I just want to finish off now by saying Naichalia and Nakara. Naichalia just means thank you in the Kaurna language. So to staff and organisers for having me back here for year 2 for this conference, I say a big thank you. Really appreciate it. Must have done something right last year to get another invite back, hey? What do you reckon? But to the audience, thank you very much for your time, your attention and respect while I've been up here speaking. I really appreciate that. Thank you for engaging in the language. Hopefully I was able to teach you something here today, not only about myself, but about the cleansing ceremony and why that's important, but also about the traditional name of this area that we're on today. So a big thank you for that. Thank you for laughing at my joke that I had about my totem name. I really appreciate that as well. But the last word, and I would like to teach you this word so you can remember this for the end of the day, is nakara. Can we say that one? Beautiful. So like I said, I want you to remember this one for the end of the day or when you're going back to your home state or territory, because we don't like to believe in a goodbye in Aboriginal culture, because goodbye is a little bit too final, like we'll never see each other again. So down here in Kaurna country, we use the term nakara, which means we'll see you again when our paths meet. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you. I really appreciate it. Enjoy your time here in Kaurna country in the beautiful city of Adelaide and get home to your loved ones safely. See you later. Thank you.
And thank you, Cliff. Again, that was fantastic and moving. Can I too pay my personal respects and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we're meeting, the Kaurna people, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And highlight that we bring with us to this forum some message sticks, which are special to us at NHRA because they were created especially for us at our first forum like this in Brisbane in 2022 by Uncle Marcus. And these message sticks are an important symbol of shared values, knowledge sharing and safe passage through the sharing process. And you are welcome to hold them, and I encourage you to hold them if you're up here making presentations, to carry with these message sticks with you. Now, unfortunately, there is that part where there's the housekeeping notes that I have to run through, and I get that good job. And all plenary sessions this week will be live streamed to audiences across Australia and New Zealand. And for those online watching us, welcome. It's great to have that level of interest. I think 200 odd, Andrew, that are online. And I don't think that includes the ones that are joining collectively in rooms to have watch parties, as I think they're being termed in certain organisations. But it's a great acknowledgement of the value this research is held for those things to be happening and those groups to be coming together. We will stand and we must use, and to speakers, if you're here, please use the microphones because we need the microphones in order for our online audiences to hear the audio. All the plenary sessions over the 3 days will be here in this hall. If you have any trouble finding a session that you want to attend, please grab some of our NHRA staff and we will direct you. That doesn't include me because I'll get lost just going outside. We do have a quiet room available too. If the busyness of the sessions gets a little bit too much, there is a quiet room that you're welcome to use. A note of caution, if I can, for those walking here, especially from the city side, along this footpath in the street. It's a very narrow footpath. The traffic is very close. And on the back of last year, well, we saw how close that traffic was. We just want to bring that to everybody's attention as you walk out, especially perhaps after a drink this evening, just to be careful of that. We will, of course, be asking you to complete the obligatory survey on what you hear and experience at the forum. And the forum sessions qualify for continuing professional development points through AFAC's Emergency Management CPD scheme. So, Rob, thank you. Social and networking functions at the conclusion of today's program in particular, and after our inaugural awards presentation, which will be at 5 p.m, you're invited to join us for some welcome drinks on the Broughton and Ferguson concourse. Again, if you need directions to that, our staff will be happy to point you in the right direction. Questions of sessions today and throughout the week. Questions and comments will be taken from the floor, of course, but can also be lodged through Slido. And at different times you'll see the Slido QR code appear, so please feel free to do that if you're more comfortable, or for those online. Don't forget to join the conversation on social media, and then we encourage you to share your insights using the hashtag NHRF25 and tag us at Hazards Research. And of course, this is a safe space in which to listen, learn, challenge, but we ask that it's always done respectfully as we share our learnings, and we engage respectfully in the spirit of the forum, both online and here at the forum. To kick us off with our first keynote of the afternoon, it's my great privilege to introduce Andrew Gissing, our CEO. Thank you.
Thanks to Iain and Cliffy Wilson too for the great welcome to country, and I too pay my respects to the Kaurna people and also to the South Australian Emergency Management Minister for her words of welcome to you all. And I have to say it's great to see you all here. Some of you were at our Brisbane forum, our first one, back in 2022 in October. We're a lot different now in NHRA than what we were back then. We've got a huge program that you'll be interacting with throughout this week, and it's really exciting for us as a team to bring that together and to see how you'll all interact with that, and really encourage exactly what Iain was just saying then, how we'll all learn, challenge some of our existing thinking and views, but most importantly, just the diversity of people in this room and the ability to connect with people that you haven't met before, share ideas, and build those relationships, because we know what's so fundamentally critical for the utilisation of research is actually those relationships, about the things that you'll talk about this week, the things that you might go back and email about and have a telephone or a Teams conversation about in the weeks and months to come. Those relationships are absolutely critical to underpinning what we really want to do, which is achieve impact out of our research. You'll notice on the program, last year we were here, really successful forum, and one of the main reasons why we're back is the success here in Adelaide. But you'll remember that we introduced this concept of be ahead of ready, and you'll see throughout the program again, we want to challenge you to think about the complexities and uncertainties, and I have to say that those complexities and uncertainties in our world have only become even more significant in the last 12 months than what they were 12 months ago. And we really encourage you to continue to think not only up before the next fire season or next severe weather season, or the recommendations that you're still responding to from the last inquiry report, but to fundamentally challenge yourself about how we're thinking about decades ahead. And in forums like this, where you've got like-minded thinkers, to be able to start to craft that transformation and continue, because we here want to be able to give everybody the space to lead that transformation that we really need to be able to be on the journey together to build safer, more resilient and sustainable communities. And we saw that yesterday. We set aside some space at SafeCon SAFECOM, and thank you very much for all the SAFECOM staff for accommodating over 100 researchers and end users out at Creswick yesterday. You know, providing the space for people just to come and talk about research and exchange those lessons and learnings and findings and moving forward and into utilisation. Just so valuable. And looking at our generation of researchers in terms of the MCAP, First Nations Network, these groups that are leading themselves in the way that they're coming together to talk and share is really fantastic to see. So congratulations to all those that were involved yesterday. What I want to touch on for the remainder of the time that I'm talking here this afternoon is really about where we are at the centre now. As I said, we've turned 4 years old this year. We're a lot different to where we were in our first forum. But I would just want to firstly recap just a couple of key things for us all, because some of you, it might be the first time you're actually engaging with NHRA this week, and that's great. It's great to see you here and very much welcome. For others, you would have been at the first forum and been here right from the start, so you will be able to judge us already about how we're living up to our vision and mission, which is all about building safer, more resilient and sustainable communities through research, science and innovation. We talk about research which is useful, usable and used. We talk about our model about end-user driven research, where we get our research ideas from our end users and then work collaboratively with researchers and end users to deliver on that research that is supportive of better decision making and protection of lives and impact. We continue to have excellent support from all our participants, and thank you very much for all being here this week. 32 different participants from across the country, and the diversity of questions that we get is great, but it's also the support that we're delivering to you to be able to have research which is going to be able to be impactful for your organisations to ultimately build upon that mission of safer, more resilient and sustainable communities. We're working with about 52 different research organisations right now. That's either across what we call our core program, which most of you are familiar with, but also our contract research program and our education program. And it's great to see our PhD scholars that were here that are here today and this week that ran their symposium this morning as well. And what fantastic energy it is to be able to walk into that room at the start of an event like this and get the ideas and get the passion for the topics that they're working on. We're really fortunate this week. Ian's already mentioned a few numbers, but I thought I'd give you a bit of breakdown about who's in the room this week, not only in person, but also online. So these numbers were crunched last week, so they're already probably higher than what is here. But we've got about 30% researchers, got about 35% of people from state government. We've got about 7% from not-for-profits, about 7% from Commonwealth. I don't know why 7% is the typical number here, but it is business 7%. International 7% and 5% from local government. So there is a true diversity in that room, and particularly that state government one. We have some of our traditional stakeholders from emergency services, but there's planners here, there's recovery experts here, there's folks from health departments here, there's environmental organisations here. So that's really great to see. If you look at some of our key achievements throughout the program already, we've got 81 active projects. The really cool thing is, and really relieving for me, is that we've got projects finishing that are moving into utilisation, that are having impact, and that's some of the work that we're really investing in now to really start to measure that impact, to be able to tell you how your investments in the centre are actually translating into real life impact and making a difference there. We're really strong on aligning to things like the National Action Plan, and no doubt we'll be able to show really good strong alignment to things like the National Adaptation Plan when that's released there as well. A lot of you will have seen us very heavily involved in the media, particularly over the last little while when there's been so many events to talk about, and that's something that we think is very important to connect our research out there into communities there as well. But already we've been able to allocate about $30 million of funding there as well, but that will continue to grow as we run further concept rounds and get further projects up and running. But I think we've got this really great stories in NHRA, really about how we're touching everyday Australians. So I talk about how we're impacting the lives of 27 million Australians, and many of you in the room are part of this journey, right? So I'll just use a few examples. I won't touch on every one of these boxes, but think about how researchers inform the Australian Fire Danger Rating System, for example, and the use of that by people in bushfire-prone areas. Think about how researchers inform the Australian Warning System. Again, things that are used by everyday Australians every day. Think about how we're investing in the safety of first responders, and already how that's making a difference. And things like that we'll talk about today, the Australian Disaster Resilience Index, how that's assisting to prioritise mitigation, but also actions of various organisations and decision making. Things like emergency management doctrine, and it's good to see John Richardson in the room, just the safety of pets and emergencies handbook the other day that was released, based heavily on Mel Taylor's work in the CRC. But we continue to see our work being picked up in doctrine and being used in those ways. And there's many, many great stories about how we're impacting the lives of everyday Australians. This also is really about how, all the way from the strategic to the tactical. So, I spoke about Be Had It Ready before, but we've also been very heavy in thought leadership, things like last year where we were talking about nature-based solutions. And on the back of things like the Nature Positive Forum in Sydney last year, assisted relocations, and many of you will see the assisted relocations workshop, and we're fortunate to have folk like Gavin Smith in the room and Richard Smith from New Zealand as well, who'll be partaking in that, and experts across Australia later on, a key policy issue. The work we've done with NEMA already around things like crisis management principles, the work that we've been doing with New South Wales Government of late to roll out capability maturity frameworks that were originally developed in the CRC but now are being utilised more fully by the New South Wales Government. Also being about agile, like a lot of us will have been on the webinars that we hosted around the LA fires, and that's something that we pride ourselves on, being agile to the needs of the sector and our stakeholders. And so we had over 2,000 people registered to learn about the things that we could bring back in terms of research and science from LA to here, because it's a risk that's truly present here in Australia as well. Our transformative scenarios, and Liza Geltz, she ran I think you got some more stuff on the program coming up, but we've already run a workshop on those transformative scenarios already yesterday, but there'll be some work that we'll be launching over the next few months with AFAC as well, and making that more available to help people get their heads across the world that we're facing. And we've been running a masterclass on foresight and innovation over the last 24 hours as well, and being able to touch that back to these transformative scenarios, which will be useful for everybody as well. We're going to talk about ADRI in a little bit, but things like outlooks for flooding, the work that we're doing at the Bureau on extreme rainfall, helping to inform that tactical level intelligence, which will mean in the future, once that's uptaken, better forecasts of flooding, better decision making, and we see the need for that on a day-to-day basis. But already we're seeing, agencies use, for example, the work from our 2022 post-floods work, particularly the New South Wales and Queensland work, but also the work that's going to come out very soon post the Victorian, South Australian, Tasmanian and Southern New South Wales flood events as well, which will have equally significant findings. And then also, things like the data that we've been working with, working to help with the Soil Net program in JCU and University of Queensland. Some of the work that we do with the Bureau around mobile radars in the last couple of years. I put Suki's work there around smoke and eye surface, and we're going eye surface health, and we're going to be investing in that further now that we've got a project up and running to develop some further guidelines based upon that work, which is great. The other thing which is really positive I can report is we're investing a lot more in evaluation, as I said, but already that's showing how our research has already been picked up in policy. And I've just thrown, some screenshots of a whole bunch of documents there, but there's a lot more. That's a really important thing, and that's really critical. But I think that's really good for everybody in the whole room to know. One is that you're creating this impact. It's not me standing up here, I'm from NHRA, aren't we doing a great job with creating impact? You guys are creating that impact. We might be creating the environment that's assisting that, but you are creating that, whether or not you're an end user and you're taking the research and using it, or you're a researcher and you're actually generating the evidence in the first place. And you should all be proud of that, and be proud that we're valuing the science and the evidence to inform the policies. A few things just to touch note that we've been launching of late. The Extreme Fire Behaviour Knowledge modules, which work off the back of our Black Summer research work, already seeing some good uptake amongst organisations for this to really help uplift capability around better understanding extreme fire behaviour. I've already spoken about the transformative scenarios, but yes, we'll be making these available over the next couple of months. And talk to Liza or any folks in the NHRA team if you want to know some more about that. We've been doing some great work with Central Queensland University, and I know that we've got Greg and Dan talking a little bit about this later on. But to be able to get this work already being uptake in the AFAC IMT training, incident management training, is really fantastic. That's almost immediate. We all know sometimes that utilisation and impact of work takes some time. But in this case, really, really great to see that immediacy. And we'll also be talking a bit more of the program about this report that we'll be launching today, which is the State of Disaster Resilience Report, which is based upon the great work of Mel Taylor, supported by NHRA and NEMA over the last couple of years. But it shows how the Centre has been able to invest in work that was done through the CRC and continue that, and the value of that work going forward. And certainly from my perspective, I think that's something that really becomes quite a national data set. We've seen that picked up already in the latest Treasury, Commonwealth Treasury Measuring What Matters report. So just, again, some really great utilisation. And also, again, agility. So we see the folks from JCU in the room, also University of Melbourne, that really helped with our small program of work after Tropical Cyclone Alfred, but a relatively small program, already basically complete, with observations for practitioners, one being around the built environment, with the great work that JCU did immediately on the ground to be able to make recommendations, find where the damages were occurring, even at 50% of the design wind speeds there on the Gold Coast, looking at things like wind-driven rain and looking at some of the key ways our building codes could be improved in the future, providing that evidence already, and the work that we've done out of the social media analysis there as well, already providing and already getting into groups like the AFAC Warnings and Information Group recommendations about how to use social media better. Because social media, like in this world of uncertainty, social media is changing. And the way that services interact with social media also needs to change if we are going to use that as a successful platform. Innovation is a big thing for the Centre, and again, we'll be running our disaster challenge again this year. We're going to be down in Hobart, but it's a national challenge, right? Entries closed this week, and we're really looking forward to seeing some really good entrants. But you know, building future capability is really important. I mentioned the MCAP network. Put up your hands if you're on the MCAP network. There's a few hands going up. I see Hamish has got his hand up really high. That's good, mate. And Adriana. So no, that's great. But they all came together yesterday. I think you had about 30, 40 odd people at the SafeCom. Again, you know, getting our researchers to be able to work together, network together with shared purpose and share those things which are on their minds, which is great, and investing in that next generation of researchers, because they're the ones that are really critical to solving these big problems that we're all facing. The other one is, you know, again, relationships building between end users and research community, but also about how we're upskilling and scaling out our work placement program as well. So this is some work. I know that Patrick's going to talk to this one. I keep on showing this at all the events that Patrick just happens to attend as well. So, but yeah, this is great, and Patrick will talk more to it, but we're just finishing off some work to get another 3 interns into other organisations, and we'll be scaling that out even further in the next financial year. But translating research is a heavy focus of ours, obviously with projects finishing, so webinars, more of those, more hazard notes, and more other ways that we can get people in touch with our research, translating that, getting it used, etc. That's the key thing. But you will see, obviously, throughout the program, a whole bunch of different research topics. And I haven't really picked these 6 that I'm going to highlight now for any other reason, but just show a little bit of depth and variety of different new research projects, because you'll see some of the more mature ones this week, but you also see some of the new ones. So I'm just giving you a quick taste of that. So, you know, looking at recovery, things like insights into temporary and emergency accommodation. The heat wave and resilience space also being led here out of the Adelaide University, which is great. And heat wave is obviously a key thing for us all to be thinking about, and having a large program of work around heat wave and resilience in our program now is fantastic. Communicating flood risk, you know, we were talking about this to Anisha this morning, you know, the challenges, you know, even looking back at the recent mid-north coast floods and thinking about how we can up the ante on how we communicate risk to our communities. Thinking about the work that we've been doing with NIDA, with the National Indigenous Disaster Resilience Initiative, you know, funding the foundations of Indigenous disaster resilience, and the impact that work is already having. And congratulations to that team for the work that they have been leading. I mentioned the work that Suki's starting to lead around the managing the impacts of firefighter eye health, which is great. And even in the infrastructure space, and I know that there's some infrastructure companies in the room today as well around strengthening energy networks to withstand severe windstorms. So again, you'll see the depth and diversity across the program and the impact that we're all in the room desiring to have. So I repeat those key messages: think big, think boldly. That's why you're here. You're not here to think about to go back to your office with business as usual. You're here to think about change. You're here to think about how we're going to create a safer, more resilient and sustainable world. We're here to try and create that environment for you to do that. So thank you very much. I'll leave this just as a final slide, but stay engaged, be part of the journey, and we'll do big things together. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Between now and afternoon tea, we'll have 3 speakers, which will be followed by a series of questions. So the format will be, I'll ask each of the speakers, which are, firstly will be Brendan Moon, a Coordinator General for NEMA, Professor Ariella Helfgott from the South Australia Futures Agency, and Dr. Tiahni Adamson, the South Australian Youth South Australian of the Year, talking about her work as well. At the end of it, and Andrew, I notice there are 4 chairs, so I'll ask you to rejoin the panel members at the end. We'll have a combined question and answer session from the floor and on Slido. So the first speaker I'd like to introduce is Brendan Moon, AM, Coordinator General, National Emergency Management Agency. Of course, Brendan is one of Australia's foremost natural disaster professionals and has been serving in the role since, it says here 2002, but I'm not going to put that on you, Brendan. Brendan's role is, of course, critical in ensuring everyone involved in emergency management is working collaboratively and making sure that that term emergency management is used in its fullest and broadest sense. As a firm believer that for NEMA to be successful, collaboration must be at its core, Brendan is a national and international champion of learning and has been a long-term supporter of ours, and we thank you for that, Brendan. And I'd like to welcome Brendan to the stage to deliver the annual State of the Nation briefing.
Geez, no pressure there, is there? The State of the Nation. But thank you very much, Iain, and to the board of NHRA, thanks for the invitation once again to join you. And I think this is the 3rd year in a row. And I think what I'd like to do first is really to recognise the leadership and the vision that NHRA bring to the space and the sector and the communities in which we work. And I think it was really, really important, the vision that NHRA have when they talk to safe, secure, sustainable. I like to add on to the end of that, a prosperous nation as well. And we really welcome that contribution and that leadership. It is much more important. It's much more important to recognise it's just not research. When we join those policy prescriptions that you inform, when we actually enable that thought, the work of your research, and we turn it into outcomes for our community, that is the true worth of the work of the NHRA and all of you in this room. So I'd just like to take a moment to recognise that and also to celebrate that. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Today, as we discuss the challenges of emergency management in our nation and indeed globally, I'd like to recognise Indigenous Australians who undoubtedly have a deep connection and understanding of the natural cycles and rhythms of this continent, and their knowledge of land, water and weather patterns of Australia will inform how we as a nation are more resilient to a changing climate and some of the other challenges we will face. As I said, this is the 3rd year I've actually stood here. And usually what I like to do is contact the people who are hosting an event like this and go, well, what's the core message that you really want me to deliver here? State of the Nation seems a very, very grandiose title for me. So I contacted Cheryl Desher. Now, where's Cheryl? G'day, Cheryl. So Cheryl's guidance to me was just do the I'm the weather guy from ABC, and just tell us what the weather's been like in the last season, what our experiences were, and what we've got to look forward to into the future. But what I'd like to do is just digress just a little bit if I can, but I will deal with the weather if I can. They are not my original thoughts on that screen. What I'd like to do is just reflect very, very briefly on the global platform for the United Nations for Disaster Risk Reduction. John Richardson was there from AIDA. My colleague who leads disaster recovery and resilience, Jill Charker, was also there presenting on behalf of Australia. And essentially it was a health check of how globally the nations around the world are actually delivering on the Sendai framework. And I'm a great believer in the objectives that have been set in the Sendai framework all those years ago are as relevant today as they were then. Just to remind you, those 4 key objectives about understanding risk, about having the policies, the institutions, the people, the frameworks to actually manage those risks, the continued commitment to invest in risk reduction and making and ensuring that our communities are more resilient, and then finally the importance of preparedness, building back better in recovery and reconstruction, and development and in continued investment in capabilities that will keep our communities safe, more secure into the future. And essentially the health check that we were hearing last week in Geneva was that on the plus side, mortalities as a result of natural disasters around the globe are actually falling. We're investing more in risk reduction. The inclusion of resilience action plans and resilience strategies at a national level, at a regional level, and importantly at a local level is increasing around the world. And can I just call out the great work of many of the recovery and resilience agencies we have in the room here today who are working with their communities to incorporate that understanding of risk at a local level and then prioritising the steps and the work that they're going to take into the future. And that they're wonderful outcomes for this nation and will support us into the long term. On the downside, the risks are shifting. Our understanding and our preparation and our planning historically has been around catastrophic events. However, what we are seeing globally now, and I think for many of the people in this room, our experience over the last 5 years has been high frequency, low impact events, cascading, compounding, overlapping with each other, where we're in this virtual state of response and recovery throughout Australia. And what does that mean for overall systemic risk in this nation? And are we planning and investing for that sort of scenario into the future? The economic cost of natural disasters continues to rise in spite of all our efforts. We need to get serious about funding. As the impact and the frequency and the intensity of these events obviously increases, are we keeping pace with that? Are we evolving our systems? Our understandings of where we should invest and why we should invest, is that keeping pace as well? And for me, that's the beautiful part of the work that the NHRA do, is that you are informing the answers to those questions. And that's the future for us. So if I can now get onto the weather, if it's okay with you, Cheryl. For many of you in the last 3 years, you will have seen this animation. We've just updated it for this year. Along the bottom scale, dark purple, not many activations. Okay, then at the other end of the scale, which is the yellow pieces over the course of the last 20 odd years, that scale is up to 50 activations for a particular local council area. That gives you a sense of where we've come from. Here's something a little more granular. And I asked people, where were you in the last 3 years when some of these events impacted your communities? And I think for each and every one of us, we have our own experience of dealing with either one or two of these events, or having to deal with, since 2019, 362 of these events that has impacted most local government areas throughout the nation, not just once, but in some cases, at the extreme, 26 times in the last 5 years. So I go back to that, my earlier contention, is that this permanent state of response and recovery, what are the structures, what are the people, the capabilities, the investments we need to be making to actually deal with those? And more recently, for this season alone, remember way back in September when the first bushfires started to unfold in the Northern Territory, and then latterly throughout Western Australia and also South Australia into Victoria, followed by major flooding events across the north and also more recently in central western New South Wales. 93 local government areas in the last 5 months activated for some sort of relief measure or the emergency services. 59 of those twice, 20 LGAs activated 3 times, 4 times in the last 5 months. And I think that underlines the challenge that we really have here. So what did we learn from these? And I'm very sensitive to the fact that everyone has their own experience and everyone has had to deal with a particular event or a particular community in their own particular way, and they have their own reflections from this particular season. For us, all those events and the really challenging events that we saw of both flooding, cyclones, bushfires, we have a really experienced, effective set of emergency management professionals in this country that keep us safe. And tragically, there has been loss of life. And if we look at the numbers, the dollars, number of LGAs impacted, the reality is there are thousands of people still out of their homes as a result of the events, not only this year, but also in past years. We recognise insurance is an ongoing issue throughout the country and is putting pressure on how we mitigate risk historically. Anticipatory action. I saw Mike Wassing before, and I think Mike's somewhere in the room here before. Good to see you, Mike. Good to see the Queensland team as well, the Victorian team, the Tassie team as well. What we tried differently this year was there was a real focus on preparatory work, exercising before the season with all the scenarios that we could come up with so we understood the strengths, the capabilities and the approach that we could take. And that was our approach for this season. And I think for the first time ever, and it'd be worthwhile for some of you to understand it, is to speak to Mike. Jimmy's over there as well from QRA. We actually saw states knock down the borders that exist between them that events didn't respect and start to work together at the highest levels of political leadership all the way through to an operational level as well, anticipating what was going to come next and what were the capabilities that needed to be in place to actually deal with that event and keep communities safe. And this was a feature of how we responded to some of those big events this year. But we also, in anticipation of some of those events, we were fast-tracking support to communities as well. We could see cyclones tracking in over major populated area, and Jill's team working very closely with both Queensland, New South Wales, for Tropical Cyclone Alfred, for example, were activating support measures and sending clear signals to communities, you're not on your own here, you will be supported. And that's important changes, and I think we probably need to invest a little more in terms of our thinking around that anticipatory action into the future than we have in the past. Supply chain vulnerabilities. Who would have thought one little bridge, one 2-lane bridge on the Bruce Highway in North Queensland would potentially render the whole of North Queensland a major population centre in Cairns, and also the whole of Cape York and its First Nations communities within 18 to 24 hours of running out of food. When all the redundancy that were built into our supply chains were compromised as a result of that event, that forced us into building a land bridge, sea bridge and an air bridge to supply a really large proportion of the regional Australian population, It highlighted again the fragility of our supply chain networks. Power telecoms. Yes, there were hundreds of thousands of homes that were without power. When you don't have power to your warning systems and you can't issue emergency alert, it is a whole different set of circumstances for your communities. And that was the repeat message that we kept getting back and we kept seeing. And this ongoing issue about building capability, not just in the emergency services, but what does community capability actually look like and how do we resource them? How do we have confidence in the community to be able to handle their own response and also recovery? Because increasingly, this is becoming a feature of our world. Can I just look at, very, very quickly, the dollars? We've been through this period now, and this is why I say, are we evolving at the rate that we really need to as a sector? Back in the teens, we used to be running at around about, nationally, $2 to $5 billion would be the recovery reconstruction program. That chart on the left does not capture insurance losses. Today we're running at around about $23, $24 billion. I'm sure Jill will have a much more finite number there and she'll share over the next couple of days. And that doesn't incorporate the events of this year. And all our colleagues in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria are telling us it'll be in the order of $2 or $3 billion. So we're up into the area of around $27 billion. $3 or $4 billion of that will be payments directly to individuals who are experiencing hardship. 2/3 of that number will be for reconstruction of assets, essential public assets. So these are huge numbers we're now talking about. These are in the realm of health budgets, education, and numbers that you'd usually associate with large infrastructure projects, and that's what we're facing. But we're also investing more in risk reduction, in resilience. Betterment is a feature now. It used to be a feature of one state's approach. It's now 5 or 6 states across the nation incorporate betterment in how they build back after an event. We're talking about managed relocation. We're talking about resilient homes. What else do we need to be investing in, and are we really keeping pace? And are we investing in the right places? So when I come to the work of the NHRA, I look at those streams of work that you do and I talk about your leadership. And I talk about the system that we are trying to build nationally here. And it's a system that really is built upon the work and the capabilities that the states possess. And that's that scalable capacity to prepare, respond and recover, no matter the size of the event or where it is. It's that continued recognition that we get the best outcomes when it's locally led, but when their ability is tapped out, then they understand who is there and what the safety net actually looks like. And then finally, we continue to invest in risk reduction and resilience. But importantly, as we need to evolve the system, the where, the why and the how, we're very much reliant on some of the work that's being done by your network here at NHRA. And for that reason, we're building a national risk profile. There is no national risk profile or national understanding of risk throughout the country. There are quite different approaches taken by states and territories. And if we look globally, if we look overseas, and we shamelessly steal the ideas of the US and Canada and the UK, who already have a quantitative approach to risk, this is what we're seeking to build, a national asset now, so that we have that quantitative understanding to start to inform investments in both capability, resilience and risk reduction into the future. And importantly, I'll be really, really interested in listening to the work of UNE when they start to actually talk about the Australian Disaster Resilience Index. That's good. I think I've lost my place now. And we're going to hear from Melissa Parsons. And for my mind, it's fantastic understanding where the risk lies, where the vulnerabilities lies, where exposure lies from a quantitative perspective. Thanks, Iain. But really understanding at a local level what the coping capacity is and the adaptive capacity of a particular community, that's what we're looking for, because that should be informing where we invest. That should be informing where investments in infrastructure, critical systems, and also capabilities for the future need to be guided against. And they're big challenges for us as a nation in terms of how we currently invest. We'll also have the opportunity this year, the brand new government that are in place now are yet to consider the Colvin and Glasser reviews, which are probably uppermost in people's minds here. But recognising prior to that we had the Bushfire Royal Commission, we also the Productivity Commission, which have provided clear guideposts of where we as a sector and as a nation should be focusing our attention. And they're important guideposts as well. So I think we'll see more and more work in that space as we move forward. And then finally, to wrap up, we can calibrate all we like in the natural hazard space. And if there is a picture of Australia looking at the last 50 years of cyclone tracks, the blue portions on the coast are those existing coastal hazard inundation areas where we know there are significant exposures. We know the continent is going to get hotter and bushfires will be a greater issue in our lives, as will heat waves. But we also recognise there are other hazards which potentially will disrupt how we approach that. And that is why, as I come back to that important aim of the work of the NHRA about building a safer, secure, prosperous nation, it's about understanding those risks and, importantly, where and how and why we should be investing in them. Thank you.
Brendan, thank you, and I'm sure there'll be a range of in-depth questions for you when we reconvene the panel. Our next guest is Professor Ariella Helfgott, who has, I think, the coolest job title in the world. She is the Foresight Director at the South Australia Futures Agency, which I think is just a remarkable entity in itself. And Professor has more than 20 years' experience enabling future-focused dialogues, collaboration and systemic change across more than 26 countries. She leads the co-creation of sustainable, equitable, healthy and prosperous futures work. And today she's sharing with us her significant knowledge and expertise in the presentation titled Informing Through Foresight. Welcome, Professor.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me and thank you for all the really important work that you are all doing. I'll also begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Kaurna people and their incredible resilience and generosity to continue to welcome us here. I explain what I do to people by saying that there are 4 really qualitatively different types of question that you can ask about the future. The first one is, what do we think will probably happen, which is often where data and trends, mathematical models, projections and probabilities come into it. We don't actually have data about the future, we've only got data about the past up until the present. And there are things coming at us from the future that we can already see signals and signs of, or that have just arrived, like generative AI, that we barely have any data about. So it's important to use all the data that we have, but also know that there's more that we need to think about. And there are other questions that are worth asking, like, what do we actually want or not want to have happen? And that question, that second question up there, has nothing to do with data and is actually all about values and about being able to create a safe enough space for people to really get in touch with their deepest values and actually articulate the type of future that they would really like to live in without being afraid that someone's going to call them idealistic or unrealistic or somehow neg them about probably something that's the single most important thing that they're saying. So that one's the hardest one for people, particularly for public servants in my experience, because we can be really afraid of, we don't want to say anything that we can't definitely deliver. But from a strategy perspective, it's the single most important question because it's what gives you your strategic directionality. Also, if you can't describe what success looks like and what good looks like, it's going to be harder to achieve and it's going to be harder to bring everyone along with you on that journey. So being able to describe that, and then it's out of that description of success and what good looks like that we can identify the strategic objectives that correspond to it and work backwards from that to figure out what we would need to do to get there. The third question, the what could possibly or plausibly happen, is where exploratory scenarios come into it. And when you're doing those, you're trying to stretch your thinking as far as possible to pin down the edges of the board of the future landscape as best you can, knowing that you never will. But the Australian Energy Market Operator that makes a set of scenarios to optimise the national grid, their second to last set of scenarios, energy transition outpaced all of those within a year, and it was embarrassing because they weren't ready. It meant the national grid wasn't ready. And you can only prepare for what you're prepared to imagine. So when you're doing the exploratory scenarios, the idea is to really push things as far as you possibly can in your own minds while still remaining legitimate. It still has to be plausible to people or else there's no point. And then the fourth one is the what are we going to do about it? And most people jump into what are we going to do about an issue, like housing or something, without doing any of the first three, or maybe they do a little bit of one. So if you've got that vision of what success looks like, you can do a process called backcasting. That might sound weird. Probably a lot of you in this room are really familiar with it, but for those that aren't, when you say I need to be at work by 9 o'clock, so I need to be on the bus by 8:30, which means I needed to have left the house by 8:15, which means, and you keep working backwards, and I want 8 hours sleep, I want to snooze my alarm 3 times, so I'm going to go to bed at 9 o'clock. You're backcasting from the outcome. So we do actually do it all the time. The thing is that when people are doing that, they're doing it in what's called the shadow scenario, which is the set of assumptions that everyone has about the future that they don't really know that they have and wouldn't be able to articulate. But all of the assumptions that we have about the future are what determines what we think we should do today. So if you were designing a car, you wouldn't only test it on a straight, smooth country road, even if that was where it was probably going to be driven most of the time. You would have a responsibility as a designer to test it in all of the most ridiculous conditions that any idiot could put it in, and that's also our responsibility when we're making strategy and policy and plans. So those 4 questions, they fit together like this. We're a group of actors in the present. Doing foresight work is just an intervention in the present. We rearrange the present because we change our assumptions about the future by doing this work. We're going to create a shared vision of what we want. That second question, what good looks like. Those tubes, they're meant to be different scenarios, so they've got different challenges and opportunities in them. So what you might need to do, you still want to achieve the positive vision, even if all of that other shit happens. But by working backwards in each of those scenarios, you get different pathways. We can look across all the pathways and figure out which of the actions are pretty no regrets and work in most scenarios, which are the ones where we would trigger them if certain conditions happened, and you can weave it all together to make an adaptive strategy. The 4 foresight questions actually directly map onto the elements of a strategy, because if you think about what a strategy document is, it tells you it says what you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it, and usually something about why you think that would be a good thing to do. So it usually has some kind of vision in it. It's often not the maybe 6-page really descriptive version of 2050 that I've worked through with people. It's probably boiled down to a couple of paragraphs, but it's there. And then a set of strategic objectives that if we achieved those, that would be corresponding to achieving the outcomes in the vision, hopefully. And then either pathways or pillars of the strategy, some key initiatives under those, cross-cutting themes and enablers that are always funding and political will, amongst other things. And so you can see how they really do just directly map onto those 4 types of foresight questions. And there's an almost limitless number of ways to get at those 4 questions with different types of people. But they all start with horizon scanning, which is about just paying attention to the signals and signs of change around us, starting to recognise and notice patterns. There's always currents and countercurrents, and it can be very difficult to tell which one will end up being dominant. So that's why we're engaging with multiple possibilities for everything that we're picking up. One heuristic that I like to use in horizon scanning is to think about these 3 arrows of time. There are the strong trends in the present that are probably likely to keep going forwards, like decarbonisation, digitalisation, ageing populations. Then there are the things from the past that will catch up with us, like climate impacts, socioeconomic inequality, decolonisation. And then there's the 3rd arrow, the red one, which is things from the future coming at us. That's the arrow that gives people in my profession a tinfoil hat wearing reputation, because it includes things like brain-computer interfaces, so that when you walk outside, your Uber's already waiting because it could have anticipated that you were going to need that. Toilets that when you do a poop will tell you your microbiome and what you need to eat. All kinds of, they exist. There's all kinds of personalised, mass personalised at-home medical diagnostic devices. That's really a thing. Everyone's laughing, but the thing is that when these things arrive and they're suddenly here, then everyone's like, why didn't you see it coming? So we do have to engage with it, even though it can be hilarious. So there are these, we're in the middle of at least 5 huge global transitions all at once at the moment, depending on how you cluster these actually epic shifts. I mean, there are at least 15 global megatrends in here, even just in this list. And, because they're global and megatrends, you've heard of all of these. So I'm not telling you anything new here, but I am going to go over a bunch of things about how they're showing up and relate to hazards and emergency management. So the first one is this first cluster, global energy transition, decarbonisation and associated opportunities for green reindustrialisation that are meaning that there are new industries popping up in new places in Australia. So we're changing the distribution a bit of where people live, and that also means something for what they're exposed to. Obviously, climate impacts, resource pressures like water availability and food, increased natural hazards, loss of biodiversity, ecosystem collapse, and a bunch of consequences for public health and uninsurability. The third cluster is the digitalisation of society, AI and automation, which come with lots of great opportunities, but lots of cybersecurity and technological ethics issues. I don't know how that... Am I touching? I don't know how that moved. Anyway, very sensitive computer. So we've also got the growing socio-economic inequality and vulnerability, disinformation, misinformation, social polarisation, cultural fragmentation, threats to social cohesion and democracy, and finally the economic uncertainty, fragmented global markets, and lots of geopolitical instability. I'm going to start with talking about inequality. The reason why there's a picture of UK coal miners on this slide is because I've just said we're in the middle of at least 5 global transitions, and transitions have winners and losers. If you look at a map of poverty and economic inequality in the UK now and a map of where coal mines were, they're precisely matched, so that you can see that a lot of the poverty and economic inequality in the UK is the result of a poorly managed energy transition from coal to gas in the past. And given that we're going through all these transitions, if we don't want to bake in all the problems of the next 100 years, it's really important to make sure that everybody gets brought along. When we were in the middle of experiencing COVID, it felt like a giant tsunami at the time, and it was. Now it seems smaller now, and the thing that seems really big and looming over all of us is the geopolitical uncertainties. But even bigger than that, and behind them, is the climate change momentum. But the biggest one that drives all of the others, but also impacts our ability to do anything about any of the others, is the societal unevenness. These graphs, the U-shaped graph on the right, poverty and economic inequality in Anglo countries was falling until the 80s and then started rising again and continues to rise, and that inequality is continuing to grow alarmingly, whereas in continental Europe and Japan it went down and stayed down. So it's not the poverty and economic inequality that we had to have. There are a bunch of policy choices that contributed to those outcomes. And we know that climate impacts and natural hazards really impact lower socioeconomic communities worse, that they are a lot more vulnerable, that their ability to prepare for and mitigate against hazards is less, their ability to rebuild and recover afterwards is less, and so that's something really concerning. We know that we're heading for more of all of this. We're also, these are the projections from the AGE OCE through Goethe University that show where it's red, 50% or more less rainfall, runoff and groundwater recharge in the red areas by 2070. This is a graph that shows the number of days above 42 degrees in Kent Town, just outside of the centre of Adelaide, which is an alarming chart. And that makes urban greening not a nice to have aesthetic thing, but really an existential necessity for the livability of our future cities. And yet we know that low-income neighbourhoods have a lot less greening. It's the rich areas that are the green, leafy neighbourhoods. And that means that people in the poorer areas are paying up to 20% more in their energy bills. And there's, a complete cycle of how all of these things interact with each other that just exacerbates the inequality. Something that's frustrating here in South Australia is that the biggest reason for people cutting down trees on private property is actually because they're shading their solar panels, which is so annoying. But that's also because people think, I'm me in my home with my relationship with my energy retailer, and I want to have cheap energy, so I'm gonna cut down this tree. The fact that energy transition is actually a transition to decentralised energy generation also opens up all kinds of new possibilities for ownership of energy system stuff and governance. And so there's movements towards community batteries, and we used to have lots of community level organising in Australia, and this gives me hope because it means that you can look at things at a community scale and say, we all need these trees because we all need them for the heat island effect, and we need solar panels. Where's the best place to put everything, and how are we going to share? Another link between the climate impacts and the energy side of things is right now Poland is having blackouts because they don't have enough water for cooling, because if you run thermal energy generation or nuclear, then you need water for cooling. And I don't think everyone thinks about the fact that blackouts could actually just be caused by these types of climate impacts. But in the past 5 years, more than 50% of the world's power utilities and energy companies have experienced water-related business impacts. So then, on to the uninsurability in the face of all of this. Uninsurability is a giant global trend, and it's certainly happening in Australia as well. Anyone in South Australia will recognise our beloved RAA bee, Trev the bee. And so RAA's always had automobiles and insurance and travel, and now has energy as well. And in the last years, the floods in South Australia have come at such an enormous cost, like the cost numbers that Brenton was talking about that are just really blowing out. Companies like the RAA have had to go to global reinsurers to cope with these costs. And global reinsurers like Swiss Re won't take on the reinsurance unless you can prove that the risk is going to be the same or less in subsequent years, and you just can't do that with climate impacts. So the only way that they could do it was by saying, we're just not going to insure certain areas. And actually, in December last year, the RAA just sold their insurance business to Allianz, which says a lot. And the guy who's the chair of the board of Allianz has come up and written this big article about how our entire financial system is actually on the edge of collapse, because if you can't get insurance, then you can't get access to credit and to finance. And you have to be able to insure the asset for that to even be viable. So what's going to happen to our entire finance system? It's such a big thing. I'm not really sure that anyone's definitely thinking about that at the moment. But for you guys, what it means is that we need new models of risk pooling, really facing that, thinking about public-private partnerships and pre-disaster funding and new ways of dealing with insurance. So the International Federation of Red Cross does do forecast-based finance programs in almost 100 countries. Another interesting convergence is between construction and advanced manufacturing at the moment. So the white one is a guy that has 3D printed his own house at home. And the other one is one of DAS Studio's beautiful modular prefabricated sustainable homes. These things get dropped into national parks as accommodation. They can be picked up and taken away again. And there's an entire supply chain from the southeast of South Australia, where we've got these cross-laminated timber plants, and there's a CRC that's called the Build 4.0 CRC that is looking at these intersections. And there's also all kinds of opportunities for how prefabricated homes can protect against natural disasters, but also can help with the recovery of them. And it's possible to imagine a future where it's just a scenario. I'm not saying it's what will happen, but where if people want to live in certain places, they have a more temporary attitude to home. I had the fortune of chatting with an amazing guy called Stephen Tingay, who was the head of foresight for Foster's in the 70s, and he lives in the Northern Rivers, and all of the homes around him were destroyed except for his. And I asked if he was going to move, and he said no, because he's really attached to living there. And then we had a conversation about the intersection of a bunch of trends where there's a lot of young people that can't afford to buy homes in the place where they actually want to live. And if you can't insure the asset anyway, why own it, let alone the fact that you're probably not going to be able to get a mortgage? So then what will happen to the whole Australian economy if houses aren't the cornerstone of everything? So that's another big question. So the digitalisation of society and AI, automation, cyber, so much opportunity. It's virtual power plants that have kept the lights on in lots of places throughout storms and hazard events. And it is digitalisation and connectivity that allows that to happen. Drones, I'm sure you're all on top of this and using it. I'm doing work with the landscape boards in South Australia, and talk about using drones that was novel a year ago. They're just doing it all the time for weed management, and the drones are really good. So in the emergency sector, they can be used for situational awareness, to identify where people are, to deliver things, medical supplies, other types of supplies. There's also digitalisation of trees. There are entire, like tens of thousands of trees being managed through IoTs and sensor networks and drones delivering to individual trees exactly what they need. Landscape level twins of entire ecosystems. These things are being developed. It's amazing. For water, given the real decline in native water sources and given the impacts of what happens if you don't have environmental flows, which we'll come back to, the need to think about alternative sources and recycling for human use is huge. And the digitalisation part is an important part of enabling that circular economy for water. This is the inside of a Siemens autonomous vehicle. People on average only drive their car 4% of the time. So maybe the autonomous vehicles might play a role in helping with the urban greening thing, because perhaps some of those car parks can be converted back to green space. And also, when people drive cars, they drive all over the road, it turns out. But all the trials of autonomous vehicles show that they stay within 1 to 3 mils of the same track. So all the trials show rutting of asphalt within a week, which means we'll need to rethink roads in that case. Lots of really interesting things there. Dubai and China already trialling autonomous ambulances. One of my other jobs is that I'm the Global Director of Foresight for the World Energy Council, and we've just done a review of all the global energy outlooks and scenarios for this year. And I can tell you that none of them take into account the demand spikes caused by AI and data. So that's the flip side. And they also have huge water demands. So add all these things into the mix, the opportunities and the challenges. Another thing is that all over the world, connectivity and speed are determinants of success and prosperity, but we have huge inequality in connectivity between our regional areas and our cities, and lots is needed to do something about that. Obviously, lots of areas have been really interested in Starlink, but given the way that Musk is crossing a lot of boundaries between being a political actor and a private company owner, interestingly, he's turned the Starlink on over Iran right now. But it's raising questions for people in Australia about sovereign capabilities in this regard. And it also raises all of this raises questions about cybersecurity, because with all of those opportunities come the cyber risks. And we know that cyber attacks are happening on emergency systems, on comms, hospitals, infrastructure. The AI itself could actually deepen inequality, because at the moment it's not equitably accessed by everyone. And if we don't design for inclusion, then automation will concentrate on advantage and leave others really unprotected. Another big thing, and it is really related to the digitalisation and the AI, is the disinformation, misinformation, social polarisation, this entire cluster of things. The World Economic Forum's last global risk report had it as the top global risk for the next 2 years. There are a lot of examples of where dis and misinformation have really interfered with both emergency management during an emergency, but also recovery afterwards. One of the most awful ones was Hurricane Milton. There was all sorts of viral stuff of people telling them they had to not evacuate, not listen to FEMA because it was a government conspiracy and you had to stay home to protect your property, and that would have resulted in huge loss of lives. We know that conspiracy theories were barriers to controlling COVID, and that there's a rapid spread of medical dis and misinformation online through social media that Australia is not immune to either. Here in South Australia, we've had misinformation impact of the Voice campaign. The city of Onkaparinga, when they went to declare a climate emergency, the council chambers were stormed by 200 people, and it took 26 police to break it up. And a lot of the people that were involved in that, believed that climate change was a conspiracy and were sovereign citizens and other things. So we are living in this time of the end of consensus reality. We're there. So lots of emergency management organisations now have virtual operation support teams to counter all of that, but also to use the social media and other forms to help with situational awareness. But in the face of all of that, this year's Edelman Trust Barometer shows that people have moved from fears to polarisation and now to full-on grievance mode. So trust in everything is at an all-time low. And this is really interacting with inequality, because the more the inequality grows, the more this issue grows, and people feel disenfranchised. The quote that I've got from the article is 60% of respondents say that they are aggrieved. They don't believe that their family will be better off in 5 years. They don't believe the system is working. They find it difficult to navigate this world of disinformation, and they have no hope for the future. And that hope for the future thing is probably one of the most important bits that we will come back to at the end. The good thing about the hope for the future is Richard Edelman says that where there is optimism, it will overwhelm grievance, and so there's some courses for action in that. Everything on this slide is now old, even though it's all still happening, and when now we have this Israel-Iran situation. The main implications of this are, for you guys, are supply chain vulnerabilities, increased cyber threats, heightened surveillance and security measures. There's some less obvious dynamics. I'm not sure if I can. Yes, thank you. More disinformation in the Milford hurricane in Florida. A lot of the disinformation was unfortunately traced back to Russian and Chinese actual government operations. All of this stuff has an impact on polarisation and social cohesion back here. It creates economic instability, which creates budget pressures, competition for skilled personnel, all kinds of health system overloads, also just because of the anxiety caused by all of this. There's also something about resource nationalism and energy security where, if we are going to actually succeed in the energy transition, that requires quite a lot of copper and critical minerals, and countries are really starting to that's becoming a source of tension in the geopolitical situation. I'll keep going on. So right now and for the last month or so, we've had a giant ecological crisis in South Australia with a massive algal bloom that was made by a dinoflagellate that blooms when the ocean temperature is above 18 degrees, and it gets in the gills of everything that has gills, so it doesn't differentiate. It kills absolutely everything. We've had sharks, stingrays, all the fish washing up on the beaches. It fills their gills up, but it also releases hydrogen peroxide, and it aerosolises with wave action. So when people are surfing or walking along the beach and breathe it in, it also really is a public health issue for humans. So that's been quite a big deal. Also, there's been a slow-moving ecological crisis in the Mount Lofty Ranges here, where until recent rains, they just actually hadn't had any rain since February 2024. So they've lost 30 to 40% of trees. There's 79 species of bird under threat. There was an entire conversation going on about releasing some water that had been reserved for municipal supplies to fill up some watering holes to stop some Indigenous fish going extinct. And when you consider the last one, our health and our public health depends on our ecological health. This loss of biodiversity and ecosystem degradation have huge public health implications: infectious disease, compromised medicine supply, well-being, degraded climate resilience. We know that COVID was intricately linked to biodiversity and ecosystem health, and the same's true for, we are potentially on the edge of another pandemic with the H5N1. We know in any way, whether it's that or not, that pandemic, the COVID wasn't a one-off pandemic, that we're entering an era of increased zoonotic risk driven by habitat loss and migration and global trade. And if you add to that war, heat waves, food insecurity, you've got some pretty fertile ground for not being able to manage that really well. And yet, pandemic planning budgets are already being slashed. And if COVID taught us anything, it should be that reactive politics really fails us. But the safe environment that we had for COVID tracking here in South Australia has just been dismantled. I'll summarise by saying, from all these things, there are all these really close interdependencies that show you that growth and economic prosperity and inclusion and sustainability are really interconnected. With this compass, what I want to say to you guys is, okay, so we're facing a lot of stuff. It's all interconnected, it's very complex, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and it can feel a bit overwhelming. It's tempting to outsource foresight and other types of things to AI or to experts. And AI can process huge amounts of data, and it's really useful for synthesis, though you have to check it. But it can't intuit the future, even if it looks like it can, and it can't do meaning-making in context on the ground in each community and organisation across this country. The decisions that shape the way that natural hazards and emergencies play out are taking place in the hearts and minds of humans. and that is across all scales and levels in our society. So we have to care about bringing those people along on the journey. And experts, no expert, no matter how smart they are, can see or know everything, especially not everything going on everywhere in a really complex, constantly evolving, emergent world that we live in. We're facing huge amounts of uncertainty, hugely divergent, plausible futures, and anyone who's going to stand up on a stage and tell you the future is going to be like this with certainty is A, full of shit, and B, trying to control the narrative and potentially a fascist. We can't rely on someone to give us the right answer because there isn't a right answer. There's no one right answer and no one's coming to give it to you. And if someone claims that they're going to, you should probably run the other way. Each of us has to engage with the diversity of plausible futures that we're facing. And for each scenario, we need to ask ourselves, is this a plausible scenario? And if it is, are we ready? And if we're not, what do we need to do differently today? In the face of uncertainty, each of us has to do the work of paying attention to signals and signs and to patterns, stretching our understanding of what could happen and what's possible, and then reflecting deeply to get in touch with our own values to figure out what direction we want to go in the face of all of this. And then get to work to create the new things that don't even exist yet because the old systems are crumbling. And those values, the empathy, the mutual responsibility, the respect, those are the things that actually translate collective human intelligence that can come from distributed foresight networks and whatever into collective human wisdom. As long as decisions are being made in the hearts and minds of humans, the navigation has to be done by us unless we want to give up that agency entirely too. We have to step up, even though it's really uncomfortable to do that in the face of not knowing. It's the values that are the compass. They are how you know what to do even when you don't know what the outcome will be. And we can't say that we're always going to know what the outcome will be. Risks can be specified, quantified, managed and insured against, but the whole reason the uninsurability is happening is because a lot of the things that we're facing can't be specified, quantified or insured against. We're in a situation now where we don't only not know exactly which outcome will happen, we don't even know what all of the outcomes could be because of the amount of emerging things. We don't know all of the chains of causation and we don't know what all of the actions we should take are. I know I need to wrap up. I just wanted to say, though, that all of that uncertainty, even though it can feel really uncomfortable, is also a huge, and the not knowing is a huge opportunity for innovation and for creating something new and better. When things are really certain, they're kind of locked down. When they're uncertain, there's possibility for change. And at a time that seems so dramatic, it's hard to think about that possibility, but it is the opportunity and the invitation of this time. All of the psychological literature on hope says hope is about being able to imagine a positive future while facing brutal realities, and imagine pathways to that, and to all people live in tension between what we control and what we don't, but we also all always have some agency to take a step wherever we are. So what I'm leaving you all with is a job. Each of you needs to do the work to reflect on and get in touch with your own values and actually imagine, what does success look like for you, for the sector, for Australia? And then to take up whatever agency you have in your lives and in your work to take whatever steps you can towards that positive future. Because if we don't do that work, we will end up somewhere else. There are plenty of other people who would like to tell us what the future will be. And yet we can have the agency to shape something better right now.
I'd just like to say I have no idea what the future is, but I'm glad there's hope. Thank you. Our final speaker for this afternoon before our question and answer is Tiahni Adamson, a conservation biologist and the 2024 Young South Australian of the Year. Tiahni is a proud Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman descended from the Kaaru Nations islands off the tip of Cape York Peninsula. Passionate about sustainability, Tiahni is the lead community and engagement officer at climate change solutions company CH4 Global, where she ensures Indigenous knowledge is embedded into their projects. She was recognised as one of Science and Technology Australia's superstars of STEM and in Daily South Australian 40 under 40 for 2023. And today she's sharing her thoughts on thinking long futures, which will carry on nicely from that presentation. Thank you, Tiahni, and welcome.
Kapukuth, everybody, good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be able to be here with you today. I'm now the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Engagement Manager for Bush Heritage, so that's an old bio. So if you are looking for a link to Bush Heritage, that would be me now, which is really exciting. It's such a pleasure to be here on Kaurna country with you all, and I had a bit of a giggle when I was preparing these slides around the intensity of ahead of ready. And as I was doing a bit of research, I found this, which obviously isn't your branding, but it was like a super intense ahead of ready, ensuring those we serve always stay ahead of ready. Anyway, I had a bit of a giggle and I wanted to share it with you because I thought it was fantastic when you're talking about hazards and all this really intense climate disaster, biodiversity loss, the collapse of the world, that we bring in a bit of humour to be able to get through together. All of the pictures that are on my slides have been taken by myself travelling around Australia on country, and there are pictures of mob who have now passed away. So for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and other communities and cultures, deal with your grievances as you need to, because there are these pictures of people who have passed. We're on beautiful Kaurna country, and it's an honour to live here and work here and spend time here. I've been living on Kaurna country for about 9 years, which I think is the longest time I've ever lived anywhere in one spot, in many different share houses and things along the way. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to Cliffy, an absolute legend and community leader, for welcoming us and doing a smoking ceremony today, something that we all probably needed coming into this space as well. We have an unbroken connection with this country that still is just as strong, just as resilient to the lands, the skies, the waters, one another and our culture, no matter what that looks like or how it's perceived by others. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's culture is still just as strong today as it was 65,000 years ago. Any conversation about resilience and preparedness has to begin with truth-telling and respect for sovereignty and valuing First Nations leadership. So this is the Yarning Circle at Wiltshire, which is one of the boarding schools where communities from the APY, where some of my family are up Frigo and Armada Way, would come down and spend time on country. This was one of our Aboriginal summer schools for excellence in science, technology, engineering and maths. I grew up on an island, and it's really important as First Nations people we talk about place and where we come from and what informs our worldview. I was actually emceeing a dinner here a few weeks ago, and someone came up to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I proceeded to tell them that I live at Aldinga Beach and I grew up on Palm Island and I lived in the country and blah, blah, blah. And then he told me about all the boards that he was on and what his role was, and I realised that we had different ways of thinking. So we're place-based relational people, and it's really important for me to be able to bring in my perspectives. I grew up on Palm Island in the early 2000s, which was when there was a death in custody and the community had a massive riot against the police station, and it was the best place ever to grow up. I had the best time. It's really important to value and acknowledge our lived experience and that these views are my own. I'm a Kaaru woman and I have connections to Pitjantjatjara mob, but I'm not representing the voice of my community or the voice of a company right now. My connection to country and leadership in environmental, community and governance spaces is a personalised approach. And I guess a prompt for bringing this together is, what does resilience mean through an Indigenous worldview? And that differs for all of us. So growing up on an island taught me some really strong values from a really young age. I think I was 5 when we moved up to the island, and that was that culture, community and healthy country is absolutely everything. It's all interconnected. We're not in a hierarchical system. It's a very circular way of understanding the world. It also taught me about equity and inequity. Santa didn't come to Palm Island for some reason. He didn't care about the black kids on Palm Island. He never bought gifts. We didn't have special things on the island. And it made me realise from the age of 5 that there was a big difference between kids who grew up on the mainland and kids who grew up on the island and what we were able to experience, as well as that of our education and schooling. When he got to the age of about 11, if you wanted to keep experiencing more school, I went to an old mission school that you still couldn't practice culture or language on in the early 2000s, that you then had to move across to the mainland to experience more schooling. It also taught me that resources are finite and that things run out, and that if you don't care about nature and country and the people that you're with and share your resources equitably and look after each other, that things run out and shit hits the fan. So we know about loss and damage in the climate crisis. We know that Australia is experiencing escalating natural hazard risks from climate extremes, fire seasons, floods, sea level rise. First Nations people were disproportionately affected by both climate impacts and inequitable disaster responses. And another thing that being on an island taught me, coming from a community that's 1 metre above sea level, is that we're really at risk when we have these conversations about hazards and climate and country. Western systems are often reactive, not regenerative or relational, and we need transformative resilience that requires deep time thinking and place-based connection. As I was talking about before, introducing myself and understanding where I come from is the way that we need to think about governance and looking at our environment. The cost of natural disasters in Australia is projected to rise by $73 billion by 2060. Without significant mitigation, this is absolutely an environmental shitstorm, for lack of a better word. First Nations people have been practicing long-term climate adaptation and risk mitigation for over 60,000 years. It's pretty incredible when you think about that. Diprotodon and megafauna here in Australia went extinct 25,000 years ago. So we had a relationship with like old, massive dinosaur beings. That's super cool. Sorry, I'm nerding out a bit here, but if you're into megafauna and old fossils and dinosaurs, I think that's bloody epic that my ancestors cruised around with beings like this. We have a culture and a richness that expands about 2,500 generations of people, which is incomprehensible. We have seasonal calendars, cultural fire regimes, sustainable aquaculture, ways of working with the environment that give back to country, and we have orally passed down knowledge systems. The way that our Western governance system works often looks to 3-year plans, with maybe a 4th year coming on the end of a short-term electoral cycle, and doesn't integrate Indigenous long-term governance, which is a massive problem. I'm really proud to put this slide up because it's part of one of my sissies, Mebu Fisher, who's an amazing First Nations woman. It's out of her published work that talks about the difference in the way that Indigenous and Western knowledge systems sit, what their likeness is and what their differences are as well. And this isn't for comparison of what's better or worse, although I might have a preference internally myself, but it's about noticing the different ways of thinking, what we can take from both, because both have their advantages, and how we can move into the future by bringing the best of all of this with us. When we're critical thinkers and we utilise our beautiful big human brains to understand and interpret information, we know that it's important to look at all of the things in front of us and pick the best parts of it to make the right decisions, rather than just being in one lens and not considering everything that could possibly happen. So our Indigenous way of thinking is holistic, it's community and community-based and practical applications on country. All life has value, and the way that we operate is intrinsically tied with our sense of spirituality, which is very different from a Western way of thinking. It's often a more compartmentalised, siloed approach to doing business, which sometimes gets things done really quickly, but often leaves out the long-term governance and the ability for different institutions and bodies to work together and collaborate and communicate. The bonuses of what we have together that's the same is the way that we understand patterns and observations to understand our world and explain complex systems and experiments. Indigenous governance is place-based, relational and responsibility focused, and it's not rights-based. And we're seeing a massive banging together of different worldviews with that at the moment. This is Yirui or Milingimbi up in Arnhem, a community that I used to work in a few years ago, and I wanted to bring this point in about our resilience being embedded in First Nations cultural systems through relational knowledge and ongoing land-based practices that have been going for 2,500 generations. Indigenous approaches to adaptation, like reading the environment and planning with kinship systems, sustaining food systems through balance and care, are not just alternative ways of thinking, knowing, being and doing, but they're foundational, proven systems that actually work and have kept us being the longest surviving culture in the entire world. How nuts is that? It still blows my mind. I'm very proud, as you can tell. Resilience is a huge part of this discussion that we have around natural hazards, biodiversity and the climate crisis. Beyond the election cycles, we think forward in generations. The mainstream government structures and systems that we have at the moment, I wouldn't say are necessarily serving us in the way that we think, but the bonus of being under the government system that we have is that we have our own governance systems and structures within our families, our own law systems and the businesses that we work for. So despite the Australian government having 3 to 5 year cycles with their planning, the way that we can inform future planning for the businesses and the places that we influence can be long term. We can think about deep time and intergenerational responsibility. We can think about cultural law and sustainability and disaster risk in the way that we anchor our knowledge systems and our sciences. Intergenerational responsibility is a huge part of cultural law, and our plans, from what my family have told me, are 100 to 500 years long, which again for my brain is quite incomprehensible to try and think about what that future looks like. And as our wonderful speaker spoke about before, it's really hard with all the impacts that we're having to possibly try and understand what that sort of future would look like. But being able to have an understanding of a historical lens of deep time and use that to foresight and look forward to prepare us is something that's one of our strengths and something we should integrate better into what we do today. So how can governments and organisations centre generational accountability? Not just about keeping yourself in your job and doing the right thing so that you continue to be in the role that you're in, but actually thinking about generational accountability for the betterment of everybody. Like I said before, our governance is inherently tied to place, kin and cultural law, and the effectiveness of community-based governance where everybody has a voice, where we have yarns with the diversity of our community, where everybody needs to get a say so that when we plan for something that it suits the needs of everybody. Last time I saw Cliffy at a conference, he had a broken leg and you wouldn't believe all of the conference stages have stairs. Poor bugger was doing welcomes, having to go up the stairs with crutches all the time because no one thinks about people that aren't like them. So this is another strength of us when we have big yarns and we do long-term consultation and we make sure that we have multiple conversations with everyone, we diversify our way of thinking and we provide solutions that are purpose fit for everybody, that nurture everybody better. So it doesn't just service the person who needs the difference of accessibility, but it services us all as a whole and strengthens our community. Indigenous ranger programs and co-management agreements, local decision-making models show that these systems work and reiterate that resilience is strongest when it's designed by the communities that these issues affect. When I was up in Yirui, there was some leftover end of financial year money and a housing group came into the community and started putting new air conditioners into some of the state housing, and the community was super confused about what was going on. And they were like, what's going on? Why are you putting new air conditioners in our housing? And they're like, we've got leftover money. We thought it'd be great to keep you cool. It's really hot up here in Arnhem. And the community were like, that's great, we can handle the heat, but what we actually need is new locks and doors and security screening to be able to reduce the amount of domestic violence that we have. We don't have locks on the doors, we can't keep our families safe. So if you asked us what we needed, rather than assumed that we were hot up here and put air cons in our places, we would have had a much better outcome. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people manage 54% of Australia's reserve systems, which is huge. And have a fraction of the total investment. This is from DOR, which is the Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry. It's now DAF, it was DOR. You'll know what I'm talking about. It was ag, water and environment. These real-world examples of cultural burning, seasonal fire knowledge, the fact that we know that when a red kapok flowers, it means that crocodiles are laying their eggs, or that when ghost gums begin to peel, that bull sharks are fat and ready to be hunted in our freshwater systems. This is all science, deep ecological knowledge and understanding of the land and the law. Our marine management, the way that our tools and our equipment goes back into the land. We don't create things that can't be broken down, and bioplastics that just break down into smaller and smaller pieces and never actually are able to go back into country. These aren't new practices or just a mistake that we weren't able to produce plastics or things that didn't degrade. It's intentional thinking about long-term governance of what the risks of making something that doesn't degrade does, and making sure that we're always caring for country at the heart of all the planning and what we do. Scaling programs in any industry or area is key to national safety and sustainability, and making sure that we're servicing and looking after our First People and that they're a huge part of these conversations is really important. Not just having a seat at the table, but having leadership opportunities and a lens and multiple seats at the table to celebrate our diversity. Our communities already hold solutions in all of these places and spaces, and it's funny that in Indigenous governance and governments, that the one thing that's been lacking mostly from Australian decision making is First Nations knowledge and leadership. Crazy. We have barriers with institutional racism and policy, and that comes down to not just workplace-based, but being a First Nations person growing up in Australia and all of the institutional racism that happens from being a young person when you're born, going through a school system, the increased rate of dropping out of school, of not being able to be engaged in tertiary studies, the harm effects, decreased birth weights, all of the health risks, all of these compounding, institutionalised, systemic things that aren't a part of your forum are a compounding barrier to us being able to have a say. And it's something that we need to consider when we do our engagement and when we try and bring these knowledge systems in together, is that there's compounding pressures put on our communities that are very different to what other Australians experience. Short-term funding is a massive issue for us and a massive barrier in what we do, where our big plans, our big ambitious plans that last a long time might get like a 1 or 2 year funding. And that's an issue for all places that are trying to do a project that lasts a really long time, right? Is that we need some investment that's going to stabilise our future and give us a good opportunity to get things off the ground and have them working and lasting. Having a lack of genuine partnership or knowledge in co-design, so things don't take off the ground when we don't do things right from the first place. But our opportunities sit in right way science, which is finding new ways to integrate knowledge systems together, which might mean that it's Indigenous based or that it's Western based, but it's about working out for each project what the right approach is. Sometimes it might mean that it's co-led and co-designed from the get-go, and sometimes it might mean that traditional custodians are completely running their own project. Indigenous data sovereignty and investment into community-led monitoring is a really important part of this conversation, and that's beyond just ISIP. So it's really fantastic that governments and universities are getting their ISIP protocols down pat. It's really fantastic, but we need to make sure that we're still looking after our data and making sure that knowledge sits where knowledge is supposed to go. And we need to legitimise our knowledge system and know that our old people have PhDs without the paperwork. They've got all of this old knowledge, 65,000 years of oral storytelling, and our languages are legitimate, important language systems that need to be recognised, and our knowledge systems are important knowledge systems that need to be recognised too. So when we differentiate the difference between Western science and traditional science, it's often made sound like traditional science isn't as effective or as important as Western science, and that's absolutely not the case. There's ongoing impacts of colonial systems that treat country as a commodity and not as kin or an ancestor or a sibling to us, and this needs to change. We need to redistribute the power and the conversation around this, and that requires truth-telling. We all know this came up before. Our communities, whether it's First Nations or Pacific Mob, are the worst affected by the climate crisis while contributing the least to it. And we need to talk about decentering power and investing in First Peoples to work together. Calling on our leaders in the room and organisations to step into brave spaces and encourage investment into Indigenous-led initiatives, not just consultation. We need structural changes that embed First Nations advisory councils into climate and hazard response planning, funding Indigenous research and recognising our law, LAW and LORE. We need to empower our youth, our First Nations youth, and make sure that we grow the movement to be able to reclaim and reinvest into cultural knowledge, because we know that it's at risk, as well as our language. So transformation means, for me and my family, returning to country and truth-telling. And we're still in the truth-telling phase. And I know that everyone's probably sick of hearing about truth-telling, but there's so much truth that needs to be told. I've had an awful week of being slammed by a bunch of racists that I didn't even realise exist, by about 90 people over the weekend, of all of this content that's been coming through, delegitimising Indigenous knowledge and saying that it's not as important or as valuable, and slandering about our communities and our knowledge system and our science. It's really important that we continue to have these conversations, because we're not at a point to be able to start moving forward without the truth-telling done properly yet. We need a hopeful vision that's grounded in a future-ready Australia, and what that could look like with Indigenous governance at the heart and relational resilience at the centre as well. So I guess my keynote is calling for allyship rooted in action, humility and shared accountability in these spaces where we walk together with our First Nations leaders and Indigenous knowledge systems in a way that's courageous to be able to do things differently. Transformation means walking together at the speed of trust with courage, humility and truth. And being bold in allyship is the main part of this for me. We need to be ahead of ready by returning to the roots of this land and the leadership of our First People. This is a sexy little slide that I'm going to leave you with. It's not that sexy, actually. These are some things that I put together for groups who haven't quite got their... who want to empower their First Nations engagement to inform their decision-making about some great things that you can do or think about or conceptualise or have conversations with, whether you've got a reconciliation plan, action plan, or whether you've got a leadership that needs to see this. Feel free to take a photo. These are great things to have a yarn about. And if there's something that you think, I'm not really sure about that, Google it. There's heaps of information online. It's so good. I'm frothing Google at the moment when it's by the right people and by the right mob that are putting information up. It's so helpful. And if then you can't find the right information that you need, IATSIS, there's great resources on CSIRO, there's epic books, there's fantastic resources coming through about two-way science, about how to do engagement, and some really great mob who are leading that too. So the last thing to lead you with, this is Uncle Moogie Sumner, absolute legend. If you flew in, you would have seen him at the airport. He's a very famous fella with his beautiful, handsome face. The only way forward is in unity for future-focused solutions that equitably benefit us all. And that means leaving no one behind and not creating more hierarchies. It's about sitting together on an even surface at a table. If you care for country, country will care for you. So thanks so much. Eso is thank you in my language. So kaima eso with lots of love and thanks. My really lame LinkedIn tile is there if you want to connect with me. But all the best for the rest of the conference. I hope it goes really well, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a yarn.
Thank you, Tiahni, and that's a most insightful presentation, and thank you very much. I know I got a lot from it. Could I invite Andrew and Brendan and Professor back on stage? Thank you. And I am aware, in terms of predicting the future, that I'm standing between you and afternoon tea, and I know Rob will panic if I go too long here because he's moderating the next session. but it's important because I'm sure there will be a number of questions. Now, we do have roving mics. And I'm not sure how we bring up the Slido questions, if there's any that have been put through. And we have. And while we look for anyone to volunteer a question in the room, I'll start with Roger Jones, re-inequality. Economic history tells us every time it's been this bad, large wars were the result. There is no sign that our governments recognise this except that are hastening in it. What is your view? What, in your view, are the key counter moves? That's very deep.
I think it's one for Ariella.
I was about to say that I feel like that's above my pay grade, and that there are probably defence people in the room who can provide a better answer to that question. The defence people that I know are the ones that are working day and night to try to avoid war. Like, at least it gives me some comfort to know that there are hundreds of people whose job it is to try to avert that from happening. But I think, it's not just right now. Right now, things have just continued to escalate. But in 2023, I did a whole-of-government cyber strategy for the South Australian government, and we made scenarios. And the people that were involved in that process thought that it was plausible back then that China could invade Taiwan as early as 2026 and that Australia could potentially get dragged into that through AUKUS. So it's been a plausible, and now there's all kinds of other stuff that we could get dragged into, quite obviously, if the US gets involved in Iran. And that's something that no one can put a number on the probability of. I just, in this situation, think about, again, it's probably above most of our pay grades to stop that from happening. But where that translates for me is what can I do to try to stop the types of polarisation and tensions in my own community that type of activity could be feeding? What can I do? I'm hesitating to say this because it's going to sound a little bit lame, but what can I do to channel as much love as I possibly can into every situation that I'm in? Because we're living in such a polarised and divided world where there's so much blame and tensions and the possibility for things to escalate into violence that, for me, just trying to channel as much love into every single situation that I'm in seems to be some form of action that I can do to just de-escalate even locally. And if everyone did that, I think that would be good. So that probably wasn't the answer that you were looking for, but that's what I got.
Thank you. Hands around the room. Perfect.
Thank you. Question for the last two speakers. Do you think that there's inherent tension between those who want to know and control the future and those that are willing to embrace the deep uncertainties about the future? And if those two attitudes, how do they manifest in the way we think about dealing with resilience and disasters and so on?
Trying to pass. So I think about the reasons why people feel like they need to control or to, there are a lot of people in positions of authority who feel like they need to be able to give an answer with certainty, that there are pressures and there's like a historical culture of us needing to have the right answer, and to be able to stand up and say, I don't know, that involves quite a lot of vulnerability. And it involves quite a lot of emotional intelligence and owning your own stuff and potentially being willing to be not liked. I've had it as a personal principle for a long time to say I don't know in situations, and I can honestly tell you that that's had really mixed results for me, because some people have thought that that's excellent because it's honest and it's true and it opens up space for further conversations, and other people have just thought, well, you don't know anything, you're supposed to be a professor. So I think it's more about, well, again, each of us, what am I going to model? What are we going to do to change the culture? And what are we going to do to make it safe for people to not know the answers and not feel like they have to?
I think under the system that we're in at the moment, there's a lot of fear around taking away and decentralising power and sharing it around what that means for oneself and one's family. I did a leadership course a few years ago, and we got asked whether we thought most human beings had extrinsic or intrinsic qualities, whether they cared more about community and kindness and looking after other people, or more about their job and their career and their ego and increasing their wealth. Apparently, according to the statistics, 82% of people care more about community and other people outside of themselves. So I think we need to change the narrative in how we view other people as well, is that most people are really good people trying to do their best, who want change, who want things to be different. And we have this difficulty of having to look after our families and hold ourselves true, but we lack vulnerability in leadership, and we lack being able to get into these conversations to know and understand the humanness behind the decision making that we have, and know that 84% of people do really care about the benefit of all, about equity, about lifting up other people's voices. And so bringing back our humanness and our vulnerability into these conversations is such an important part of decentralising and changing power, because there's actually only a very small amount of people who are happy with the structure that keeps a very few amount of people with all of the wealth in the world and everyone else struggling.
I thought of another important thing to add. I agree. Just small addition. I have an international guest at the moment. He's just left the room. His research is about the biophysical reaction that people have to being faced with uncertainty. And when you're faced with uncertainty, people release a lot of cortisol and they feel awful and they just want the uncertainty to go away. And we're living in this time of so much uncertainty for everyone that people are actually attracted to leaders that will promise them certainty, even though it's the single most dangerous and not honest thing. So I think that's also part of what's going on with the tension, because there's a bunch of people who can see that they can gain power by promising certainty and by controlling the narrative in that kind of situation. And I just think that's something to be aware of and to navigate and avoid.
Can I just jump in here? Because I think this is a really interesting topic. And that is, what are the qualities of the people that you want to lead, to provide a vision, to provide confidence? And I'd suggest, depending on who you're actually dealing with, you've got to assume a different persona there. It could be during a particular crisis, for example, you are talking to a minister or a prime minister or a premier, and their interest is entirely different to a community that you might be dealing with as well. So you have to assume, and you have to have the qualities, the leadership and the approach to be able to meet the needs of the particular individual, government or community you're dealing with. And sometimes how you project that's really important, and that goes, I think, to that notion of, what really is resilience, and that ability to cope, to understand, to adapt, those sorts of qualities. And I find myself, the most vulnerable I find myself as a leader is when you immediately meet someone who's had their world crash down on them from a flood, a cyclone or a bushfire, and oftentimes you have nothing else to give except an ear and a commitment to go away, that everyone within your circle, within your organisation is absolutely committed to a better outcome for that individual. And I think that's these sort of qualities of leadership are really, really important. And we've got to have more of those conversations about, okay, then what qualities do we need, and at what times do we need to display specific qualities? And one size does definitely not fit all.
Thank you. Look, I'm really conscious of time. I know we've got a question here. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. A number of the panellists spoke about the future challenge of general insurance and the lack of affordability and market failure. Here in South Australia, we see this firsthand with new developments on the Adelaide Plain. There are a number of general insurers not providing residential housing stock insurance. We've got industry segments like viticulture can't insure their stocks, their grapes anymore. And we're seeing the pricing of insurance at a property level, which makes it unaffordable for those often in areas that are the least affordable in terms of the socio-economic structures. What's the panel's view around sort of regulatory interventions or alternative insurance in models like parametric insurance or microinsurance? And through NHRA, where might some of the future thinking lead us?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Good question. So yeah, you're right. Like if you look at the basket of inflation, right, insurance is going up about 15% per annum. It's the biggest thing in the inflationary basket. So clearly, it's a big issue for the community and also across government, right? Well, I think it's important to understand what the drivers of that 15% is, and it's not all about natural hazard risk, though. Over the last 20 years, as cat loss models have been getting better, that means that insurers can now price risk at the individual level, which in theory is a good thing because it means that there's a price signal around insurance, which means that should be informing things like land use planning, where we should be mitigating risk, etc. But yeah, like obviously some of that is natural hazard risk, supply chain issues, global reinsurance market. I think probably the fortunate thing is we haven't seen in the global reinsurance market hardening because of the LA fires and other catastrophes of the last 12 months, and so we've seen a little bit of relaxation. But yeah, like it's obviously still a significant issue. Around the market issues, I think that's really fascinating, and I think the best people who have actually written about market intervention in Australia is a submission by the Productivity Commission into the recent review of the cyclone pool that's basically asked that their position is the cyclone pool should be temporary in Northern Australia, and that's a good opportunity for government to be able to be investing at the same time, and also through the pool mechanisms to increase resilience in those communities. But also that these subsidisations or other market mechanisms, which essentially send the wrong market signals for risk taking, because if we lower insurance artificially, that means that we have the wrong signals in terms of people wanting to build there, less mitigation, etc. So yeah, but obviously things like parametric insurance too, things that are working in other places overseas, but obviously also depend upon community understanding to be able to take those up as well. Like there's certainly companies here in Australia that would offer parametric products if communities wanted them, but communities wanted to ask for them in the first place. Yeah.
I'd also add, Chris, at a national level, we have what's called the Hazard Insurance Partnership. It has the 4 biggest insurers in the country and the biggest global reinsurers in the country as well. Jill Charker and Andrew Minack lead that partnership at a national level, and we actually have the insurers in the room now actually working out what are the big drivers, where can government invest in to reduce risk, to actually impact availability and cost of insurance into the future. It's an active partnership, it's an active strategy, and it's really, really complex. But the way they've all come to the table is they want to be part of the solution. It's not just a them and us type approach. So I'm hopeful we'll get some outcomes there, bearing in mind there's a lot of global influences on the cost of insurance and availability at a localised level here in Australia.
All right, I am going to apologise to all that have gone to the trouble of putting questions on Slido, but I'll make sure the team at NHRA captures all those questions and please engage with us as much as possible. But I am going to have to draw that to a conclusion. Can I just say thank you very much to each and every panel member. Most appreciative of your time and effort and thoughts that have gone into that and sharing with us what's most important to you. So thank you. Would you join with me in thanking the panel members?